Welcome to Data Science Perspectives. This series focuses on analytics and data science professionals from across industry to learn about how their career unfolded, what skills they look for when hiring, and what trends they think are coming next. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Let's get to it. Welcome to this episode of Data Science Perspectives. I'm your host, Bill Franks. Today I'm going to be joined by Mabby Amouie. Mabby and I first met a couple of years back when we were seated together at a local analytics event dinner. I found him very easy to talk to then, and we've kept in touch and had some great conversations ever since. Mabby's currently the Assistant Vice President of Enterprise Data and Analytics at Norfolk Southern. He's been at Norfolk Southern for more than a decade and worked his way up from his initial role as a data scientist through manager, director, and chief data scientist roles to his current AVP role. His responsibilities are broad, spanning business intelligence and reporting, operations research, data and data architecture, and finally AI and data science. So obviously a lot to keep him busy. He also recently joined the global editorial board of CDO Magazine and is the co-chair of CDO Magazine's Atlanta Executive Board. He's got a bachelor's in industrial engineering from KN2C University of Technology and a master's in industrial and systems engineering from Northern Illinois University. And with that, let's welcome Mabby to the show. Thanks for joining me on the show today, Mabby.
Thanks for having me.
I like to start with everybody with the basic question of what drew you into the world of analytics and data science initially?
That's a really good question. So I was doing my bachelor's in industrial and systems engineering, and at the time, initially, I got really drawn to optimization problems and everything about operations research. I happened to take a course in applied statistics, and it was really, really exciting for me. It was really interesting set of topics to the point that there was a book that I still recall, and I still have it on my shelf, Applied Statistics and Probability for Engineers by Douglas Montgomery. Bill, I was so fascinated about statistics that ahead of the course, ahead of the professor, I started chewing that book. I started like reading concepts that were never taught as a part of that course and just was fascinated about it. And then fast forward in my master's, I got introduced to the learning problems. I picked up a couple of books, Introduction to Statistical Learning, and then follow up to that. There's a great book that it's a favorite of mine, Elements of Statistical Learning by Rob Tibshirani. Really, really great book. I recommend it to everybody. And then same approach. I just learned and learned and learned and got drawn to using machine learning more and more while understanding what I'm doing. And so I decided to start my PhD with an advisor that was kind of in the same space. I was going actually to UIUC at the time, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My advisor was Sevong Oh. He had just finished his studies at the University of Stanford. He moved to UIUC. He was working on non-negative matrix factorization and lower space mapping. And I was like, this is it. I love this. I want to do this. And then I got a job offer from the industry, and then the rest is a history. So I kind of stayed with the industry, started as a data scientist and went up the ladder. But, always a coder at heart. I love everything about AI, machine learning, data analytics. So, and that's where the journey took me.
So one thing you already kind of mentioned was you were started as an engineer, and while there are other engineers I know that made it into the world of analytics and such, it's not the most common path. So what have you found when you've worked with other people who come from some of the more common feeders into that space? What do you see as the engineering influence on how you approach data science?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few things off the top of my head. I mean, the first thing is that as engineers, we love solving problems. We love to understand what we're doing. And I'm sure, I mean, it's pretty common among other fields as well. But what I was pretty passionate about as an engineer was I wanted to exactly know what I'm doing. I wanted to understand what's under the hood. And back in the day, Bill, you would want to call a logistic regression or XGBoost, you had to write like 20, 30 lines of code. And now it's like one simple line and boom, the function is invoked and you get your answers. But I really wanted to understand what I'm doing. What is a particular algorithm doing? What data is suitable for it? What kind of assumptions going into it? What's under the hood? And so that was one of the influences that I had from the engineering background, where I really wanted to understand what's under the hood. I tell you, the other one that's kind of like a curse and blessing is, as engineers, we like to optimize things and at times overly optimize things. And then I learned, in my career that you should never let the great get in the way of good. And sometimes there's a balance between, getting things to a good level or great level versus, like, achieving something with quality and, fast enough so that it makes business sense. So the balance between, kind of like not having a perfect solution but having something that's good enough is something that I think my engineering background, it helped me like sway to the opposite direction, overly optimizing something. And but of course I course corrected over my career. But those are a couple of things that come to my mind.
That thing about the over optimizing, it's a common thread. I've found people that come from a computer science background sometimes similarly struggle with the uncertainty that's inherent in data science, because normally you're writing code and you test the code to see that you get the exact same answer every time, because that's how code should work. But then you get into some of these data science applications, and they're probabilistic and they should behave in a similar fashion and follow a similar logic, but you might not get that same answer. And people do struggle with that.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, and then you learn very quickly that, sometimes perfection is not the best thing that makes the most business sense. Sometimes you want to move fast, and I never sacrifice quality by any means, and I never ask my teams to sacrifice for quality. But at the same time, I think there's a balance between quality and speed that you really need to strike that balance.
That's a tough one for people to accept. I know early in my career as well, because I was like the pure statistician, right? You want everything to be as good as possible. You're on over optimizing, but in a business context, you have to accept that fact that sometimes that quick answer that you got today can have an impact because it's timely.
Mhm.
In a week, it could be too late, particularly if it's a specific operational issue. And so I always remind students, if you can beat whatever's in place today, then what you have is a winner. Do something with it right away. And if you can improve it more later, great. But as long as you're beating what's there, that's your goal. It's not to get the best solution, it's to beat what's there first and foremost.
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more. And in my experience, a lot of times getting to an 80%, 90% is very fast, but closing that gap, the last 10%, last 5%, and sometimes last 2%, it is extremely difficult to do so. So striking that balance and, making a timely decision, to your point, and having something like quick rather than perfect, I think that's something that a lot of engineers have struggled with that too.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, not looking for anything proprietary from your company specifically, but obviously companies like Norfolk Southern have a range of operational issues. And having talked to you and some other organizations in the similar space, I'm not sure that the audience would understand some of the really compelling data science oriented questions that an organization like yours would have operationally. So maybe give us a couple examples of some of the really cool things that you all work on.
Yeah, sure thing. Let me start by giving a couple of minutes of background on Norfolk Southern in general, because some people are not familiar with us. Bill, we are a one of the largest railroad company in the United States, and our network is very expansive. We run a 22,000 miles of track network, and it's owned and operated by us. It's maintained by us. A lot of people think that's like maintained by DOT and whatnot, but it's actually maintained by the railroad. It's fairly complex. We run about somewhere like 300 to 400 trains a day, somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 to 200,000 carloads a day. So you can just think about the complexity of routing, the complexity of maintenance, the complexity of this network to operate efficiently and as safely as possible. And we ship everything. We ship from raw material, from steel, lumber, all the way to finished products. So BMWs, UPS packages, even equipment for Department of Defense. So even the variety of things that we ship and how we need to handle it is pretty complex. Now, the beauty of our industry, something that people are not very familiar with, is that we have a lot of data. Our locomotives, for example, they stream 350 plus diagnostic sensor readings in real time to the back office. And that's a lot of data getting generated in real time every second from these locomotives that are coming in. So we use a lot of that for predictive analytics to kind of like, predict when a particular locomotive is going to break down. And as a result of that, as we accurately predict the future, now we have the leeway to either put that locomotive to the shop to fix it, or basically put it on a lower priority train if we have to run that locomotive and operate it, in the most efficient way. We also image and take videos of our trains as they run, across our network. Every rail car that passes by some of our sites, they basically get captured by the cameras. We have like 38 cameras that are capturing an average of 1,000 pictures of every single rail car that passes by. So we do quite a bit of edge computing with computer vision models that we've deployed, where we're looking at various emerging conditions on these rail cars as they're passing by. That, hey, I see a missing pull, I see something that's broken here, and then proactively go and address those emerging conditions. So the network is fairly complex. The problems are fairly complex, and unless you really leverage technology, specifically optimization, simulation, machine learning, and lately we are even using Gen AI for some of our more of a GNA function type of thing. Unless you really leverage technology, you really won't get the outcomes that you need from the standpoint of productivity, efficiency, safety, and service that we need to provide to our customers.
I remember one thing that jumped out at me one time. I was talking to somebody from your industry, and it makes perfect sense when you hear it, but people wouldn't think about it. If I'm driving down a road, even if it's a two-lane road, and I get caught behind a really slow truck or something, eventually I can just pass that truck and get on my way, and I'm annoyed for a
Right.
little while. But some of these tracks are very long and single track. So if somehow one train's having trouble in the middle, or somehow it has to really slow down, it's not like the other trains can simply pass it. It causes like a system wide backup that is much more painful than would be on a road to get caught behind a car. So I'm guessing those are the kind of things you have to deal a lot with, are the fact that if you have a problem on a track, there's not an alternative in many cases. You have to re-optimize given whatever the new reality is.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, 60 to 70% of our 22,000 miles of track is actually a single line of traffic. So if you by any chance have a breakdown of your locomotive or train has some issue, it is inadvertently going to impact every train that's ahead of you or every train that's behind you. And the other thing, I mean, and you understand it, that the nature of a network, when it's so interconnected, when something happens in one side of the network, it is going to snowball. It is going to impact ultimately the other side of the network within a matter of even at times a few hours. So something that happens in Chicago, a lot of folks might think that that's isolated, but it can have an impact ultimately to something that is running in Atlanta. So being proactive, being able to kind of use these tools to be able to tell the future and be able to say, hey, I see something going on, and I think that with X% accuracy or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to be able to predict this and stay ahead of it. It is tremendously valuable in our industry.
So, you've managed to stay in the industry for a while. What's one or two of the traits you have that you think's helped you to be successful in your career thus far?
That's a great question. I'm gonna put the technicality aside. Of course, being technical is very important for some of the data analytics roles. I think the one that I can, and I always tell people that really helped me succeed, is openness, and openness to feedback, openness to learning from others. A lot of industries, a lot of us, and the peers of mine, they're trying to kind of like solve similar issues, similar problems. And now we're in different industries. The types of issues might be a little bit different, and the magnitude of the problem sometimes differs from organization to organization. But for the most part, data analytics problems are not very unique to a particular organization. They're very similar across the board. And one thing that I've tried to employ in my career is to really connect with others and learn from them as to how they approach their problems, how what they tried that they succeeded, or how they failed, so that quite frankly I don't make the same mistakes or my teams don't make the same mistakes. So learning from others and also being open to feedback even from your teams. I mean, I'm a true believer that no matter how good you are in what you do, you're still one, and when you put more brains together, you achieve a better outcome. So being able to have that openness among your teams, among your stakeholders and business partners, mutually learning from them, and entertaining that their ideas and their opinions. That's something that really helped me in my career, and it really helped me to put together the pieces of puzzle that needed to be put together along the way.
And that's great advice. I like the point about, it's true, no matter how smart you are, you don't know everything. And if you're willing to acknowledge that, you never know when somebody's going to have an idea you hadn't thought of that's actually much better than what you had. And without being willing to listen, particularly from people on your team, their bosses who are a little more dictatorial. Well, I can't ask for advice from my team because I'm the boss. Well, I actually think it's almost the reverse. As you get higher in the organization, your team starts to know more about the specifics of what's happening than you do,
Yeah.
and you're crazy not to listen to that team, right?
Yeah, it is a fantastic point, because at times you get more distance from the actual problem. So, and I always tell people, it's not, don't say it as a cliche that I listen. It's one thing that you listen, it's another thing that you actually entertain it, because sometimes like people listen to your feedback or something, but they're really not entertaining it. They're just letting you have that moment of like expressing your thoughts, but the thought is out the door the moment you finish it. So I think it's very important to be open to those thoughts and actually entertaining them, and you really understanding that. I mean, in our field, the probability of nothing is 0 or 1, and no matter how assured you are of your decision, you always need to assume that, hey, there is 0.01% that the person that's telling you something, that they might be right and you might be wrong.
Well, speaking of advice, is there anything that now that you've been in the workforce for a while, you wish someone had told you before you started working, like back when you were a student, before you took your first job?
Yeah, I think the one thing that comes to my mind is like building an internal and external network and growing it over time, and that's something that I've done more recently in my career. I wish I did it from the very get go. I think it's extremely important to build those relationships internally within your organization and externally with a network of peers. I think the other one that I really recommend is having mentors that you trust, that you respect, that you admire, because along the way there are a lot of situations that you can seek their advice, or you can quite frankly learn from what they've done in their career or in their personal lives. So I think from the professional growth standpoint and personal growth, having mentors that you really trust and you really admire, I think it really is going to pay dividends for you.
A good one. So, you're a rarity today in that you came out of school, you got a job, and you've stayed with the same organization for a number of years, obviously moving up the ranks as you go. But what have you seen to be the advantages of staying in one organization, and kind of how do you frame your day-to-day work and then your vision for moving forward to have one company fit within your career path so well?
Yeah, definitely the rarity. I don't disagree with that. Because I see folks jumping from organization to another organization. I tell you, Bill, one thing that I think it's there's always pros and cons to everything, and the pro that I've seen with being with one company is that in very large organizations, typically when you want to roll out a program that cuts across, which most of our data analytics programs cuts across a lot of departments, a lot of stakeholders, it is quite difficult if you want to roll something out and you don't have the level of trust built over time. And one thing that I've learned in my career is that for you to be able to influence people along the way, building or having that trust built over time, it really helps. You can't build it overnight. It's something that you really need to prove with your actions and not your words. I always say, you're talking but your actions are drowning your words, so you got to really stick to your principles and show it with your actions. And when you build that trust over time, and when you show your benevolence to the rest of the organization, I think it positions you very well to be able to really have the right conversations and open dialogue with your stakeholders, that here's why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting, or my team is like suggesting this. Here's why it's beneficial for the organization. And it tremendously facilitates the rollout of whether it's technology, process, or change in people. It really facilitates that process. And I think one of the benefits of being with an organization like Norfolk Southern, in my case, is that I've got to build those relationships over time and gain the trust of my peers, my stakeholders, my business partners over time. And I truly believe that without having that, you can get into a lot of frictions. Now, it's a different story for startups. They're much more nimble. They make decisions much more quickly. But as the organizations get larger, having that alignment across the board becomes almost something that's imperative.
You know, I love that advice. What I'd say, even in that startup, they may be making decisions more quickly, but the people to whom you're giving information to make that quick decision are still going to have to trust you, right? I
Hmm.
mean, in the end, you may have known them for less time. I know in my experience, when I was at the one company for 14 years, it was the difference as the years went on was visible to me in terms of the speed with which I could get something done. And it wasn't just because I kind of learned how things work better, but it was exactly what you said. People that if I was a random new guy showing up saying, "Let's go do this," they would have been like, "Hey, I got to learn some more and we got to talk about this." And it would have taken a long time. I
Hmm.
go to them and I say, "Hey, I think we should do this. And if you trust me, I really this is the right thing to do." And I'll go, "All right, yeah, I got other things to worry about. I trust you. Let's just do it." And so I think people newer in their career or students may not always think about how important building that trust is, but they can just ask themselves if someone gave you advice on what to do on a homework or a project, or if you wanted to ask, are you going to go to that person that just sat next to you for the first time today, or are you going to go to the person you've been talking to for the last 2 years? I
That's a
think it's
great
pretty obvious.
analogy.
Yeah.
Great analogy.
So speaking of getting establishing trust and a reputation, I know you recently joined the editorial board for CDO magazine. How does something like that arise, and like what does that entail? Because I don't know that I've talked to somebody who's been in an exact role like that before.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, the whole community of CDAUs in Atlanta is it's a very small community. We run into each other all the time. I mean, you yourself, Bill, for the audience, you're one of the esteemed members of the community yourself, and that's how I got to know you back in the day. But so we always go to the same events, same things, and through some of the peers in that networking group, I've heard about I had heard about CDO magazine and what they're trying to accomplish. Which basically, a lot of it comes down to some of the things that we talked about, like how you share information with the community to make sure that the other people around you are also benefiting from that, and the things that you've done and the mistakes that you've made along the way, or the things that quite frankly made you successful. And a few months ago, someone from the CDO magazine reached out to me and they said, "Hey, we're trying to really put something together for the Atlanta chapter. We're looking for co-chairs. We're also having this opportunity to be on the board, the editorial board." And I could not say no to it because I love the community that we have. I love giving back to the community, quite frankly, because this community helped me be successful in my career. I mean, if it hadn't been for the advices that I've gotten from you yourself, from the other peers in the industry, in different industries, quite frankly, I would not probably be where I am today, or maybe me and my team wouldn't have made the decisions that we made along the way. So I saw it as a great opportunity of giving back to the community and being able to be part of that. I decided to join, and we actually hosted a dinner. I want to say about a couple of weeks ago, which was very successful, a good turnout of the CDAOs that joined, and very open conversations because most of us are not in competing industries, so we don't mind sharing information with each other. So it was a really great event. So that's really how the opportunity arose, and I'm really glad that I'm doing it.
That's awesome. It is the Atlanta community. It's not huge, but I do think we have good turnout at at events. And to your point, it's amazing what you get out of that. I mean, this whole data science perspectives thing. I mean, the only way I can pull it off is because I know so many people from over the years, from networking and so forth. If I was just sitting around one day saying I'd like to do this, I don't even, I might not even have a way to get in touch with people, let alone have them be willing to say, sure, I'll take a risk and show up and talk to you for, for a half hour. So I think it's great that you're giving back that way. Um, What's one thing if you think back now, if there's a student getting ready to graduate, or let's say early career, maybe in their first job, what's like one key piece of advice you'd give them to really think about as they launch their own career?
Um, I would tell them love what you're studying and love what you choose to do, because the moment that you have that passion and you love what you do, it's not work anymore. It becomes a hobby. It becomes a passion. I mean, with me, and I told you this early in our conversation. When I got exposed to statistics back in the day, it was just a no-brainer for me. I mean, I would go back home after school and I would hit the book, and I was like, oh my gosh, new concept, and I was just like, reading and reading and learning. It was just because it was a passion of mine. It wasn't like the chore or coursework that I had to turn around and have some homework like done. So, and I think that applies to the industry as well. As you start your career, as you make choices along the way, just make sure that you like what you do, you love what you do ultimately, and that significantly changes your perspective on how you approach work and how you get up every morning and go to your teams and work as a part of one team. I think that has a very different impact on you and how you go by you know basically going to work every day.
Yeah, I'd say I think the work environment today is pretty hectic and everybody's overloaded everywhere. And so the reality is you can be overloaded and hectic in something you're not enjoying at all, and that's completely miserable, or overloaded and hectic in something you are enjoying. And that's it might be tiring and it might be stressful, but
Hmm.
there's a positive angle to it. I know I took one job early in my career for the money, and I didn't last a year because it wasn't a good fit for me. It was just, I realized, wow, you've got to have a connection to that job. So I think that
Absolutely.
was some good advice from you there. Um, See, before we run out of time, just as you look forward now, what's something that you think is going to be really hot in the data science and analytics space here in the next, say, 2 to 3, maybe 5 years?
Well, I can tell you whatever I say is going to be wrong because as we look at the predictions in the AI space, like pretty much every prediction is coming wrong. I mean, sometimes we are over promising. Sometimes we're sometimes we never have expectation about something becoming reality in a couple of years. And I think that was me and Gen AI and the Chat GPT. I was really surprised that we got to where we got to. The thing that I would say is that I do think the classic self-driving cars are going to flourish more and more into the future. I do think anything that has to do with productivity and autonomy is going to get more amplified with the recent advents in AI, and it's only getting better. And I do think one thing for large organizations very quickly, and I think this is happening right now, where it has happened over the past few years. Very quickly, everybody realizes that they need to have better data foundations, because your AI is ultimately as good as your data. No matter how general purpose your AI is, you have a lot of use cases, a lot of projects, a lot of problems that are industry specific or organization specific. So you ultimately need to leverage your own data to solve certain problems. And if you do not have the right data foundation, if it's not governed enough, if the quality is not there, you're going to run into a scenario of garbage in, garbage out. So I do think more and more companies are going to start realizing that they need to put a higher priority on the data foundation to be able to get to a better AI and be able to scale it out. And quite frankly, a lot of the companies have already realized that and started this journey. Some are later in the game, some started quite a while ago, but that's one of the things that I can see coming. But at the same time, like I said, I mean, predictions are very difficult because of the pace that we're seeing the technology changing, quite frankly.
Well, hey, I know you're a busy guy, so I'll let you go. I think you gave some great insights and advice today. I appreciate it, and thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.